Hello friends, today I want to answer the question, are short-term rentals allowed in Maine? By the end of this video, I'm going to break down for you the ins and outs of short-term rentals in Maine, as well as dial up vacation rental hotspots in Maine that you should look at. Maine is an absolutely beautiful state, and Acadia National Forest has been increasing with visitors every single year. But have you ever wondered, can you make the numbers pencil when it comes to a short-term rental in the state of Maine? Stick with me as I talk about the tourism numbers in Maine, along with the short-term rental laws. Next, I'm going to share with you some of the short-term rental hotspots in Maine and explain to you why they're booming. And finally, I'm going to share with you data that will help you determine if Maine is a place that you should be looking to invest into a short-term rental, or if there are better alternatives somewhere else. If you're ready, let's go. So what does tourism in Maine look like right now? If I'm looking at short-term rentals, one of the main things I always look at is the data, the tourism numbers. That's going to tell me if it is even worthwhile for me to investigate and look into that area. Because if tourism numbers aren't going up or steady, then chances are it's probably declining and there's other places I should be looking. And really what that means when I break it down really simply is you are purchasing an investment in an area where you are planning for people that are traveling and vacationing there to cover your mortgage and expenses. And if you are purchasing an asset and that's your desire, you have to understand the demographics and also the tourism data when it comes to your property and the area that you're investing into. So let's dive in. Here are some numbers for Maine. In 2023, Maine had about 15.3 million visitors, which ironically was down by about 0.6% from 2022. However, here's some interesting data that you need to do a deeper dive into. These visitors spent more time and more money in 2023 than they did in 2022. Visitors spent 72,500,000 days in Maine in 2023, which was about a 3.9 increase from 2022. These same visitors spent $2.1 billion in revenue at restaurants, which was a 6.6% increase from 2022 to 2023. And this revenue supported 131,000 jobs in Maine in 2023. Maine had nearly 3 million day visitors in 2023 who spent over $200 million. One other interesting fact is these visitors that travel usually during the summertime, outside of summer months, the travelers increased by 3% from 2022 to 2023. And finally, there's some data that says that these people that are visiting Maine are visiting some of the less popular areas that most people commonly equate with visiting Maine, and that was up by 4%. So overall tourism looks to be on the rise when it comes to Maine, but there's a few areas and cities that are really starting to boom. Now let's get the housekeeping out of the way. Let's talk about some of the regulations. One interesting thing that I found about Maine when it comes to regulations and short-term rentals is that Maine as a state really leaves that regulation up to the cities, the counties, the municipalities. It does not govern like some states do when it comes to short-term rental laws. However, they do require all businesses to register with the Maine Revenue Service to pay the taxes, which is 9%. Now, because they give the autonomy to the counties and municipalities, I would definitely recommend doing the research on the exact area that you're looking to get a piece of property if that's what you're looking to do. Now let's talk about some of the hot spots in Maine where you should be looking. So some of those coastal cities like Portland, Maine, which is the largest city in Maine, and Kennebunkport have seen STRs, short-term rentals, do really well. But I mentioned there's some areas that are really booming. If you look around the cities close to Acadia National Forest, those areas have seen short-term rentals and the revenue coming from those really explode. Now, I've never been to Acadia National Forest. I was this close to going this summer, but the 6-hour drive from where we were staying in Connecticut up there for a day trip seemed a little excessive. So I opted not to go, but I've heard it is absolutely beautiful. And there's a city there called Harbour, Maine, that is an absolute gem. And that city has experienced massive tourism over the last few years. Now that can be good or bad news depending on where you stand on the issue, but an article caught my attention about 6 months ago that came out, and this was the title of that article: How much tourism can Bar Harbor handle? The article said that Bar Harbor had experienced in 2023 4 million annual visitors, which was their third year in a row of having over 4 million annual visitors. Now, just to put that in perspective, just over 4 million visitors is what Yellowstone gets a year. 4 million visitors a year is what Yosemite National Park gets. So this little area is on par to some of the biggest national parks in the United States. So yes, of course, there's going to be some stress on that city or those cities surrounding Acadia National Forest. And when I started doing some research on Bar Harbor, I noticed that the rates were pretty high. But this absolutely blew my mind. When I was looking at places to stay in Bar Harbor and those rates were really high, I'm talking $300, $400, $500 a night. Those were for most times a single room in a home, not the entire home. So that in and of itself should tell you something about the demand for vacation rentals in Bar Harbor. Now, when you see something like this happen, you have to understand there's an ongoing evolving situation that is going to be handled over a period of time. And that's when you have more regulation or more short-term rentals. And there has to be a balance there. Because if you just let it go wild, wild west and everybody builds short-term rentals everywhere, nobody's gonna be happy. But if you have too much regulation, the short-term rental people that already have their place have it established, and if they get cut down because of regulation, they're gonna be very frustrated. So there has to be an equal balance there. And I don't envy the city officials that have to deal with that. But I think that Bar Harbor is taking the right approach, because I've seen some areas that have actually been overrun with short-term rentals, and having a short-term rental in one of those areas has been a little bit of a challenge to understand that. Now, we've been able to pull through with that, but I know a lot of people that are just throwing their hands in the air and said, I'm done with this. So let's see what the data says about this hot spot when it comes to investing there. So of course, I went to the data specialists at AirDNA, and they are showing that on average, that Bar Harbor, if you have a short-term rental there, it pulls in about $55,000 a year. Now, here's my disclaimer for that. I would do a ton of research because I know some places there and people that own some short-term rentals there that see significantly more than this. But this on average, now you got to understand, this might be a one bedroom a ways away rather than something very close there. So $55,000 is the average annual income that comes in. And AirDNA gave it an AI score of 79, and that's based on 1 to 100. So 79, close to 80 isn't a bad score, but the average home price in Bar Harbor right now is $665,000. So if you just do the general rule of thumb of where you need annual revenue to be at least 10% of the purchase price of the home, that would tell you that it doesn't pencil. But once again, I think the devil's in the details. You really need to do your research to find out how much revenue is being produced on some of these short-term rentals. I'm obviously still high on short-term rentals and how powerful they can be. They're a fantastic tool to help you build wealth in real estate. So I have a video, if you go to right now, just click on the link, it's put up on this page, that I go into great detail about how to find short-term rentals, how to evaluate them, and how they can be an absolute moneymaker for you. Just click on that link right now. Thanks for stopping by. Have an amazing day.